The Carnath fleet appeared without warning, silent, sleek ships that glided through the stars like predatory shadows. Their arrival triggered the first coordinated alarm Earth had seen in decades, a harbinger of something darker than humanity had ever encountered. John Harker stared at the holographic projection in front of him, his eyes narrowing. The ships hovered just outside Earth's defenses, their weapons powered down. But it was the unsettling stillness of it all that gnawed at him. His pulse quickened as he reviewed the data again. "They're just sitting there," Maya Dune's voice crackled through his comm link, breaking the tension. "I don't like it." Too quiet. John didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched the flickering lights on the display. "This is what they wanted," he muttered, more to himself than her. "A face-off, to see if we'll blink." Maya scoffed from the other side of the galaxy. "And what do you think? That we'll roll over and let them wipe us out? We're humanity, John. We don't do that." The silence stretched, a brief lull before the storm. John turned away from the monitor and paced, the sharp echo of his boots bouncing off the steel walls of the command room. For years, humanity had expanded beyond the stars. New worlds had been colonized, alliances forged, enemies made, but none of them had been like the Carnath. They were an ancient species, known for their brutal intelligence and unyielding will. And now, they had arrived, seeking to challenge Earth's dominance. The Carnath were no ordinary species. From their origins in a distant system, they had gained a reputation for striking fear into even the most powerful galactic empires. No one truly understood how they operated, but every time they were defeated, they vanished, leaving no trace of their presence. It was as if they were more like a myth than a reality, a challenge that everyone feared but few could confront. "Do we strike first?" Maya asked, her voice colder now, edged with concern. "Or wait for them to make the first move?" John glanced at the countdown timer on the display. The fleet was drawing closer. Every instinct screamed for action. But he knew the Carnath were too strategic to waste their advantage. A mistake now could lead to total annihilation. "We don't make the first move," John replied, his voice steady despite the tension knotting in his stomach. "They want to provoke us. We wait. Show them we're not going to be intimidated." The words felt hollow, even to him. If there was one thing he had learned in his years of diplomacy and conflict resolution, it was that no one truly understood their enemy until it was too late. The Carnath wouldn't wait forever. Maya's voice crackled again, this time with an undercurrent of worry. "What if they're here for something else? What if they're not here to fight at all?" John stopped, his eyes darkening as the implications of her words settled over him. "What are you getting at?" Maya hesitated, and when she spoke again, her voice was tight. "What if they're here to disappear us? What if they've found something more powerful than we are, something we can't even begin to comprehend?" John stiffened. "I've seen their tactics. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have already struck. They're playing a game. They always have. But what if they're losing that game, John? What if we're not the ones they're really after?" His mind raced as he glanced at the unreadable symbols flickering on his monitor. He knew the stakes. This was more than just a test of military power, it was about understanding their enemy. Maya's question hung in the air like a shadow, refusing to dissipate. He returned to the table, scrutinizing the data again. His fingers hovered over the console, then dropped to the command. "I'm going in. We'll head out there and make contact. See what we're dealing with." A pause followed, and Maya's voice softened. "John, be careful. Whatever's happening out there, it's not going to be easy." He shot her a half-smile, though she couldn't see it. When has it ever been easy? As the shuttle cut through the upper atmosphere, the vastness of space stretched before them. John's breath slowed, but his mind was a whirlwind. He had led his fair share of dangerous missions, but the Carnath, the possibility that they were the ones who had come for something far greater, this was different. The silence that had enveloped Earth was now broken by the hum of the engines, the only sound filling the otherwise empty space. Maya's voice once again found its way into his ear. John, we've got a strange signal coming through. It's faint, but I think it's from one of their ships. Patch it through, he ordered, though his voice had tightened. The transmission was distorted, static crackling through the comms. Then, a voice, cold, calculating, cut through the noise. Humanity's time has come to an end. Your rise ends now. The transmission cut abruptly, and the silence that followed was suffocating. John felt his heartbeat in his throat. They had crossed the point of no return. Whatever was coming, it was already here. John Harker felt the shuttle's engines hum beneath him as they cut through the upper atmosphere, hurtling toward the designated point where the Carnath fleet had stopped. His hands tightened around the controls. It was strange, so much of his life had been spent in preparation for moments like these, yet nothing about this felt familiar. The air felt too thick, the silence too absolute. Prepare for descent, he murmured to himself, barely able to shake off the sense of unease crawling beneath his skin. John, are you sure about this? Maya's voice crackled through his earpiece. I mean, this isn't a routine mission. You're walking straight into a lion's den. Her words were sharp, tinged with concern. He could hear her tapping on her console, her eyes on their own data feed. Maya had always been the cautious one, the voice of reason in their countless missions. While he admired her for it, he'd never been one to hesitate when the stakes were high. We don't have a choice. They're here, and we need answers before they decide to come to Earth. Otherwise, this game will be over before it even starts, John responded, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his gut. A long silence followed, but he could feel Maya's disapproval lingering. Then, she spoke again, more quietly this time. Just, be careful. The Carnath don't play by anyone's rules. Not even their own. John didn't respond. He focused instead on the ship's approach. The sleek, black ship was now within view, a stark contrast against the brilliant stars that surrounded it. The Carnath vessel was enormous, its surface slick and reflective, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. It resembled nothing like the other ships he had seen, and everything about it felt alien. He wasn't just looking at a machine. He was staring at a piece of art, cold and dangerous. I'm going in, John said, his voice barely above a whisper, more to himself than to Maya. Without further hesitation, he guided the shuttle closer, watching as the dark shadows of the Carnath fleet loomed in the distance, towering over them. The tension in the air was palpable, each second stretching longer than the last. They didn't want to be here. He knew that. But Earth's survival depended on his next move. Suddenly, the shuttle systems beeped, and a series of lights flickered on the console. A message was incoming. It was faint, the signal barely registering, but it was unmistakable. John, do you see that? Maya's voice returned, her urgency apparent. It's a transmission from the fleet. They're not firing, but they're sending something. John's heart quickened. His hands flew across the controls, adjusting the frequency. Within seconds, the transmission cleared, and a voice broke through, low, chilling. Humanity, it began, the word curling around the air like smoke. Your species will cease to exist unless you submit. The Carnath offer you extinction, or a place at our side. John's breath hitched. The arrogance in the tone was unsettling, as if they believed humanity was nothing more than a passing nuisance. Who are you? John demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. He wasn't just asking for answers. He was searching for leverage, anything that could turn this conversation in humanity's favor. The voice paused, then answered, its timbre colder than before. We are the Carnath. Your species is a fleeting spark. We have watched you rise, and now we will extinguish that light. You may either kneel, or you may perish. John's fingers tightened on the console. He could hear the smug certainty in their words. The Carnath weren't interested in compromise. They didn't want to negotiate. They wanted submission. He glanced down at his own controls, silently weighing his options. If he engaged them now, they might fire. If he didn't, they could destroy Earth before the sun set. They're not asking, Maya's voice was almost a whisper now, her tone steeped in fear. "They're demanding." John shot a glance at the dark ship just ahead, its ominous presence sending a chill down his spine. The Carnath were not going to relent. His mind raced, he needed to think, and fast. "John, please," Maya urged, her voice trembling. "This isn't the way. We can't win a war we didn't even know was coming." But before he could respond, the transmission cut off, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum. The ship's engines roared to life, its engines glowing a fierce green. He barely had time to react before the shuttle's systems screamed in alarm. "Brace for impact," John shouted, slamming the thrusters into full power. The shuttle jerked violently, and he fought to steady the craft as a sudden surge of energy slammed into them from the Carnath ship. It was as if the very air around them had solidified, constricting and shattering all at once. John's vision blurred as the shuttle spun wildly. It was no longer about strategy or diplomacy. The Carnath had spoken their final words, and now they were taking action. "Hang on, Maya," John gritted through clenched teeth, struggling to maintain control. "We're not going down without a fight." The shuttle plummeted, a steep dive into the unknown. The shuttle pitched violently as John fought to maintain control. His fingers were numb against the controls, sweat slicking his brow, heart hammering in his chest. The Carnath ship's pulse had hit them like a fist to the gut, its energy wave rattling every inch of their craft. The world outside was a blur of stars and swirling blackness, too fast to focus on, too chaotic to make sense of. "Maya!" John shouted, voice strained against the groan of the shuttle's hull. "Status report." Silence, followed by a faint crackling on the comms. "I'm still here," Maya's voice emerged, shaky but steady. "Shields are barely holding up, but we've lost half of our propulsion systems. We're dead weight if we can't get it back online." John's mind raced as his eyes flicked across the malfunctioning dashboard. The damage was extensive, no doubt. They were floating, a target in a vast, empty void, with a ship that had just shown they could obliterate them with ease. His hand hovered over the emergency distress beacon, the bitter realization that calling for help might be their only option clawing at him. But he couldn't. "We're not out of this yet," John muttered, clenching his jaw as he manually adjusted the course. The Carnath had made their move, and now it was his turn to act. The shuttle groaned again, this time accompanied by a sickening metal scrape, and John winced as a shock of static rattled his earpiece. "Another hit?" Maya gasped, her voice breaking. "No. They've stopped firing," John said, his voice now taut with disbelief. "They've stopped?" There was a long pause. The universe felt oddly still, as if waiting for something to happen. John watched the sleek, ominous Carnath vessel hang in the distance, its dark silhouette more imposing than ever. Why had they stopped? Was this a trap? A psychological game? His hands hovered over the controls, indecision bleeding into his thoughts. "We need to get to the planet's surface," he said at last, snapping out of the tension-filled silence. "Maya, can you get the engines online? We can't stay here." "Already on it," Maya interrupted, her voice resolute. "Hold tight, John. We're not done yet." The words barely left her lips when a low, guttural hum vibrated through the shuttle. At first, John thought it was a malfunction, but the pitch grew, swelling in intensity. It wasn't coming from the ship. It was coming from the Carnath vessel. "John, they're doing something," Maya said, urgency in her voice. "That noise, it's their weapon charging. I think they're preparing for another strike." John's pulse quickened. His mind raced, 100 thoughts colliding in a desperate scramble for a plan. They couldn't just sit here and wait to be vaporized. His gaze locked on the distant vessel. Whatever the Carnath had in mind, he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a clean kill. Not today. Not while he still had a breath left to take. "We're not letting them take us without a fight," he said, his voice colder now. His mind began to work in overdrive, assessing options, calculating risks. "John, you've got to be kidding me," Maya protested. "We've got no weapons, no way to retaliate. You're talking about taking them on with. He cut her off. We don't need weapons. Not yet. The ship rattled again, and then a blinding light flared from the Carnath ship, streaking toward them in a flash of green energy. Hold on. John barked, slamming the shuttle into a sharp roll. The energy blast grazed the shuttle's hull, sparks flying from the damaged surface as the ship lurched, the entire vessel rocking violently. John's teeth rattled, but he fought to keep them steady. He was getting too close to the edge, and he could feel it, they were running out of time. Firing thrusters. Maya yelled over the comms. The hum of the engines intensified as the ship lurched forward, their trajectory aimed straight for the surface below. Good. We're hitting the atmosphere, John said, eyes narrowing on the rapidly approaching planet. Below, there was a glimmer of land, a potential crash site. It wasn't much, but it was their only hope. But the Carnath weren't done. The pulse of their weapon flickered again, this time accompanied by a sudden tremor in the shuttle's systems. The craft jerked violently, and John's hands flew to stabilize it as the hull groaned under the pressure. They're trying to tear us apart. Maya shouted, panic rising in her voice. John's eyes locked on the rapidly descending landscape below. They were going to hit the planet's surface in minutes. If they were lucky, they'd have enough control left to survive the descent. But the real threat was what lay below, the unknown. The Carnath weren't here just to play games. They had an agenda, and whatever it was, John was certain it involved far more than just Earth's destruction. Brace yourself, John muttered, determination surging through him. We're going down. The shuttle plunged into the atmosphere, the roar of friction against the hull filling the air. And, for the first time since they had been ambushed, John finally felt the weight of their survival pressing down on him. This wasn't a mission anymore, it was their last stand. As the world spun around him, he whispered one word, more to himself than anyone else. Survive. The shuttle groaned in protest as it fought against the pull of gravity, the atmosphere outside a storm of flames and smoke. John's knuckles were white against the controls, his mind a haze of focus and adrenaline. He had expected a violent descent, but the sheer force of the atmosphere's friction was pushing the limits of their ship. A sudden, violent shudder jolted them as the hull screamed in distress. We're not going to make it, Maya's voice was tight with fear. John's jaw clenched as the comms crackled. Don't say that. We've been through worse. We'll survive this. They hit the lower layers of the atmosphere with a bone-rattling crash. The ship's body jolted, sending both of them forward, slamming them into their harnesses. Outside, the world had become a blur of light and smoke, the planet's surface growing steadily larger. I've got an emergency landing site, Maya reported quickly, voice laced with urgency. We're going down hard, but it's the best shot we've got. Do it, John said, voice cold. He had no time to think about anything but keeping them alive. Maya's fingers danced across the controls, guiding the ship as best as she could. The shuttle lurched again, and they both heard a series of cracks. John's heart skipped as the right wing stabilizer sheared off, and they began to spin uncontrollably. I'm losing it. Maya, brace. John yelled as the shuttle spiraled into the air, the howling winds outside deafening. The planet was rapidly growing closer, and every inch of descent felt like an eternity. The ground below was coming in fast, too fast. John's pulse quickened, his instincts flaring. His hands gripped the console harder, but there was nothing he could do. The shuttle's descent was relentless, the planet's surface now looming as a rock-strewn wasteland below them. There was nothing but emptiness, nothing to slow their descent. The shuttle hit the ground with a violent crash, a force so powerful it shook the entire frame of the craft. A sickening, gut-wrenching sound of metal crumpling and shattering echoed as they plummeted into the barren landscape. Sparks erupted, the emergency systems flashing red, and for a moment, everything went dark. John's head throbbed as he regained consciousness. His chest felt tight, and he struggled to move his arms. Slowly, he opened his eyes, taking in the devastation around them. The shuttle was half buried in dirt and rocks, smoke curling up from the wreckage. Through the shattered viewport, The bleak, desolate world outside stretched out before them, an alien, hostile wasteland. "Are you okay?" Maya's voice was shaky, but she managed to keep her composure. She was already moving, unbuckling herself from the seat and checking for injuries. Her eyes darted around, clearly assessing their situation. "I'm alive," John muttered, still dazed, forcing himself to sit up. His muscles screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. "Just, barely." Maya was already at the communications panel, fingers flying over the interface. "No signal," she said with a frustrated sigh. "We're cut off from everything. No backup." "We need to get out of here," John said, his voice steadying as the fog of disorientation cleared. "We can't sit around waiting for help. Not with the Carnith out there." "The Carnith," Maya repeated with a bitter edge, the fear in her eyes sharpening. "I don't think they'll come after us just yet, but they know we're down. And they won't let us just walk away from this." "No," John said, voice firm. "They won't. But they'll be wrong if they think they can scare us off. We'll survive this, Maya. We always do." John climbed out of the wreckage, wincing as his body protested. The desert landscape stretched before him, rough, jagged rock formations, cracked earth, and the eerie silence of an alien world. The heat was unbearable, radiating off the ground in waves, but it didn't matter. They had one goal: survive. "We can make it to the ridge," Maya said, pointing toward a line of jagged mountains in the distance. "It's our best chance for shelter." Without a second thought, John nodded. "Let's move." They didn't waste time. Maya grabbed a few supplies from the wreckage, including their med kit and the emergency beacon, though John wasn't hopeful that it would work in this desolate place. The air was thin, and the oppressive heat made every breath feel like it was being drawn through fire. Every step felt heavier as they walked across the cracked earth, the heat beating down on them. The horizon seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, the barren wasteland offering little in the way of comfort. As they made their way toward the ridge, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. He kept glancing over his shoulder, but all he could see was the silent wreckage of their shuttle, growing smaller with every step. "We have to keep moving," Maya muttered, her voice tight with tension. She wasn't just worried about the Carnith anymore, there was something else in her voice now. Fear of something beyond the obvious danger. John could feel it too. A sense of being hunted. And as they continued their march toward the ridge, it became clear they weren't alone. Ahead, something moved in the distance. Something large. And it was heading straight toward them.